Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to come out tonight. I'm quite excited about tonight because there's a few things that I would like to say, some of which are related very much to the electorate, some of which are related very much to Armidale and the immediate surrounds. Other things that relate to regional politics. And I thought it was a good opportunity to do a number of other things too, is to just reflect on the nature of the hung parliament. And if I could, thank the community of Armidale as well. So the format that I intend to take, and I've just got a couple of pages with some scribble on it, but then the rest of this document I've got in front of me is essentially about trying to recall some facts if someone asks a hard question. And I don't mind the hard questions, but I probably won't be able to answer all of them. But if there are quite serious questions, we are taping this, and I know there's a couple of people in the audience that have already sent their questions along and have already written the answers. Hopefully, because they were quite specific questions. So if they are specific, or you'd like to write them down, please do so, and we'll attempt to answer them via email or letter. But I do thank my staff for coming along. They didn't have to. They've done it all in a voluntary sense, but I think it is good because the staff that I've had over the years, and Lee's been with me since 1991, this is his second hung parliament. He's probably the only staff member in existence that's been subjected to two hung parliaments. And I do thank you, Lee, and I thank all of the others for the work that they've done. The members of Parliament tend to take the credit, but obviously, particularly in a hung Parliament, it's the staff that do a lot of the hard slog, and I thank all of them, Melissa up the back, Bruce from Inverell, and Graham and John and Jay down the front as well. Graham and John and Jay are in Canberra with us, and the others are back in the electorate offices. And I've been blessed to have the three guys that I've got in Canberra, because the policy issues sometimes are difficult to get one's head around, and you need people that are there for serious reasons and prepared and able to actually decipher some of the issues that come rushing through. But I would particularly thank Armidale, the community of Armidale, and I know there's people who weren't too enamoured with the decision that I made. But having made that decision, Armidale, of all the communities, I think, embraced the opportunities that a hung parliament actually delivered. Many others, individuals, and in some cases, some communities, had a view that the parliament would not last. To be gone by Christmas, be gone within 6 months, it can't sustain itself, nothing really will happen, so don't get too involved. I never thought that would be the case. I always thought that it would probably run full term. But the enthusiasm of a lot of people, I'm not saying everybody, I know there's some people that weren't too happy either, but the enthusiasm of some people in this community to embrace some of the opportunities that a parliament that was with a balance of powers held by country people, they're the people I'd like to thank, and there's a number of them in this room. Probably embarrass a few of them by saying their names. Alan Davies is one in terms of the broadband issues and the way in which Armidale has embraced that. The opportunities that a lot of people like David Lamb and John Pegg, the Cricksmart people, a whole range of people at the university in particular, Victor Minicello is here, has seen real advantages in being able to access some of the opportunities. And that doesn't just go to the broadband network. Personally, I think it's probably the greatest piece of infrastructure we'll see this century. and particularly for country people. I think the way in which it will remove distance as being a disadvantage of where you actually live and actually enhance the very real positive nature of where we live, irrespective of where we live in the electorate. We are extremely lucky to live in those communities. The broadband arrangements will in fact remove a lot of the inbuilt disadvantages, in a sense, of living in the country, the distance factors as well. In education, and this is where I do thank the university again, the medical school and others out there are doing some very, very encouraging work. There's a lot of work being done in agriculture, for instance, and there's more to be done. But the people like David Lamb have come up with some extraordinary technologies which will have impacts on the cost of production and the cost of agriculture into the future. Other areas where I think Armidale has been at the forefront, and I don't mean Armidale just the city, but the community around it, has been in relation to the medical school. I think there's been some extraordinary opportunities taken there, and more to come, where we can embrace the future and take advantage of the hung parliament. Locally, and one of the things, I was talking to a journalist earlier today, one of the things I'm reluctant to do, and some of my people tell me I should do more of it, is tell the story about the hung parliament. What's it meant for the electorate? Has it meant anything? If so, what has it actually meant? It has meant quite a lot to the electorate. There's a number of issues that I can go through if someone wants to ask me what they are. But there are a number of commitments that came out of the signing of the minority parliament agreement. And they related to a whole range of things like the Barraba water supply, Chaffey Dam at Tamworth, the Bolivia Hill on the New England Highway, Tenterfield bypass, those sorts of issues, quite extensive development of the rail network on the Liverpool range, which is still going on as we speak, to access the coalfields of Gunnedah and other parts of the electorate and neighbouring electorates. There's been a whole range of things that came out of that specific agreement. Other things that came out of it were of a broader nature, and to be quite honest, they're the ones I'm proudest of, because I think they have the capacity to not only impact on this electorate, they have the capacity to impact on other electorates, and hopefully impact on the thought processes of people who live in country Australia. And there's a number of things that I will say a little bit later in terms of the dynamics of country Australia, country electorates. The other area that in fact, I just glimpsed someone in the crowd, it jogged my memory, is in terms of the renewable energy stroke climate change issues. A lot of angst in some areas there, particularly the shock jocks, my good friend Alan and others. This community has shown that there are a whole range of opportunities out there. And we're actually starting to see some of those things filter through the system. The carbon tax hasn't been the great ogre that was expected, and that is gradually ebbing away. But even yesterday, we had an announcement from Greg Combo, the Minister, and I think this is a little snapshot of some of the things that are happening out there. A little grant to an abattoir in Tamworth. Cargill abattoir it used to be, it's owned by Tees now, but a very good abattoir. They received a grant of $330,000 from the Clean Energy Fund, one of the Food and Foundries, I think it's called. It was part of the multi-party climate change committee deliberations. That grant goes part way towards building a $1 million biogas production unit. which is quite small, but it's the impact of this that interests me. The savings that company will achieve are a reduction because they'll be producing biogas from waste, essentially methane. Biogas from waste that normally is a negative to them, a cost to them, a disadvantage for them to handle. They'll be producing energy from that source. They will be able to reduce their natural gas consumption by 25%. They will have a power saving annually of $330,000, and they will reduce their emissions, their carbon emissions, or carbon equivalent emissions. Is this thing working okay? Can you hear me up the back? You don't want to hear me? Someone did that in Parliament one day. He said that he'd swap with me. Someone said, Mr. Speaker, I can't hear what they're saying, and someone put his hand up and he said, I can, and I'll swap with you. The biogas production reduced their power bill by $330,000. A 2-year payback. Yeah, that is a good business deal without any help from government. Without any help from government. And there are a number of abattoirs, and one of the reasons, I know there's some cattle producers and sheep producers in the audience, one of the reasons you haven't heard much from the meat processing sector in terms of their great concern, you did early on, in terms of their great concern about climate change, clean energy arrangements, is that they know that the conversion of waste into energy is a viable option, and if they can access some polluter pay carbon tax funds through the clean energy funds, they will be able to position themselves very well within their industry. So most of them are very quiet. Tees is the first one I've seen where there's actually been some money come through and they've actually explained their dynamics in terms of their business case. We're working with other abattoirs, and some of them are actually testing their bio mixes at the moment, their paunches that waste out of abattoirs, to see whether the brew that they end up with will actually produce the energy levels that they hope it will. We think it will, and one of these companies using American technology will not only be able to access some assistance from government, they'll be able to go from being a payer of carbon tax, because I think they're on about 35,000 CO2 tonnes equivalent, which puts them into the I think the 400 or 500 that would pay carbon tax. It brings that back to potentially around 1,000. It makes them completely self-sufficient in terms of energy. It puts them in a position where they can produce biofertiliser and potable water and produce excess energy for the grid. Now what that means is, isn't that great? And they'll probably get some help from government along the way, but there is potentially a reduction in their unit cost of processing. So I use these two as an example because I'm quite proud to have been part of that process, because I think that agriculture and other areas in the country are going to benefit not only from those sorts of things, because those abattoirs are very important in terms of employment, jobs, but in terms of some of the renewable energy areas too, where there's a lot of exciting opportunities and chances being taken. There's extraordinary capacity to diversify the economies of the towns that have been pretty much totally based on agriculture. And there's extraordinary opportunities to actually value add to agriculture. And they're the things we've been talking about trying to do for years, to stop this, just put it on a train or put it on a boat and send it away and someone else will do something with it. If you can value add to it here, if you can produce energy from the waste, you can have, there's some exciting prospects. I did make a few notes here. I used to do this a bit when I was first elected back in 1991 as a state seat of town. And I remember attending calling a meeting in the community centre in Tamworth. It's a neutral spot, beautiful place. It's a real community place. Everybody feels comfortable with. I put a lot of work into promoting it. Leah'd remember this. Lynn'd remember it too. Put a lot of work into promoting it, and we thought we'd have a crowd like this. And my wife went into, she started to have our third child, and she was up in the hospital and having a bit of difficulty. And I was up there about 6:30. The meeting was to be on at 7, and I was trying to rush her along a bit. Anyway, she couldn't be rushed. So I sent someone down, I think it might have been you, Les. I sent someone down to the building to tell people to steer them away, that I wouldn't be able to get there, I'd have to stay at the hospital. And everybody understood that, of course, but the next morning on 2DM, the local radio station, a fellow called Phil Corbett was the announcer, and Phil had these headlines that were along the lines of Windsor's meeting interrupted by Labor. It dogged me for quite some time. I had those meetings for quite some time after that, and the numbers just started to dwindle, and I took it as a recognition I was doing a good job. One time we had a meeting there and 4 people turned up, so we all went out to dinner. So that's why I bought a few of my own this time, just in case I have some numbers. I'd also thank the council, the Armidale Town Council, if I could, for the way in which they've assisted, particularly in terms of broadband, but also the other opportunities that have been out there. And the council's been very proactive in accessing a number. Oh, here's the mayor now. They've been very proactive in terms of accessing a number of programs out there and leading the way in a lot of ways, I think, in relation to some of these issues, and playing a valuable role with the university as well. Now, I've mentioned a few things as to what's a hung parliament mean in terms of the electorate. In terms of Armidale, for instance, there's quite a few things that have happened. And I want to spend some time on the Armidale Hospital in a minute as well. So I'm sure there's people who do want to talk about that, and I do too. But there's been quite a lot of money expended, and more to come, particularly for the university. The university's been able to access some quite sizable sums of money. The medical school, the clinical school that was opened a few weeks ago, the various broadband programs. We estimate that there's something around a $30 million number in terms of broadband into Armidale, which will be a valuable piece of infrastructure in other areas around it. And if there's any questions on this, I'm happy to try and answer them. Other areas around it will get fixed wireless. Some people aren't as enamoured with that as they might be. We're told that the black boxes that will be fitted to those fixed wireless towers, probably within the year, will in fact double the capacity of fixed wireless. There's exciting progress being made in some of those areas as well. In Tamworth, we're getting very good responses from the people who are on fixed wireless. There's no fibre optic in Tamworth as there is in Armidale, but the fixed wireless has been rolled out around Tamworth, and there's quite a rollout occurring. I think just under half of the electorate will be covered by the time, in about 12 months anyway. So that'll be a positive for all of us, I think. The other issues that I just mentioned, what's a hung parliament done? In terms of funding to the electorate, and here again, this is not my proudest part of being a member of Parliament. I'm proud to represent the electorate, and I'm proud to go out and get things for it, but I think the real issues of policy and the issues that relate to other country people are very, very important. You can have the sort of ebb and flow of being sort of opportunistic one year and not the next. But long-term policy is what it's all about. And here again, the broadband thing actually provides a real connect, whether it be aged care, health, education, the whole gamut of business, etc., agriculture. There's an enormous number of opportunities that are out there. But in terms of the hung parliament, this is the first federal parliament that's had a dedicated Minister for Regional Development. It's the first. I was shocked when I heard that. It's the first federal parliament to have a dedicated regional development department. It's the first federal parliament to have a regional Australia committee, and for my sins, I'm the chairman of that. And that's been a very interesting committee to be on, because I think it has displayed, and there's Liberal, Labor, National, and myself as an independent on that committee, it has displayed that even issues like the Murray-Darling, if people actually sit down and try and work through to find a solution, that you can bridge the political divide. And I'm very proud of that, proud of the people that are on that committee, because particularly in this parliament where there's been a lot of animosity, and people who watch Question Time think it happens all the time, it doesn't. But I think it's very refreshing to work with a group of people, a little bit of politics occasionally, but essentially a group of people that have been working towards an objective of trying to solve an issue. And there is absolutely no doubt that when the Murray-Darling Basin Plan comes down, it will be vastly different to what would have occurred if either side had had a majority in the parliament. It will be a product of the hung parliament in a lot of ways. And in all things there is compromise, and I think the executive of this particular government doesn't have the power that a normal executive would have, so there has to be some degree of compromise, and that Regional Australia Committee has provided that channel to get that compromise actually working. This particular Parliament has been responsible, the hung Parliament, the arrangement particularly that Rob Oakeshott and I were able to put in place, for a whole range of funding opportunities, some specific to regional Australia and regional projects and regional infrastructure, some in a more general sense. But the other thing that I think a hung Parliament does is stop nasty things from happening. I watched it through the 4 years that, when it was my vote that put Nick Greiner into power back in 1991 to 95, and Joe Hockey used to work for Greiner and Co back in those days. Joe would come running around the office and say, if we put this into the Parliament, Barry O'Farrell was another one too, that if we put this into the if we put this into the Parliament, will you vote for it? So a lot of the compromises took place not in the parliamentary building, but chamber, but in the various offices. That happens in this Parliament as well. So some of the things that I'm proudest of are the things that I've been able to stop. Caring for our country, the farm-based, environmental and other funding, about 2.5 billion, I think. 2.2. I think that would have been scrapped in a hung Parliament, particularly without a hung Parliament, in a majority Parliament, particularly with Wayne Brown hunting around for this movable surplus that he seems to be preoccupied with. A number of other areas in the climate change area, the carbon tax area, in terms of that multi-party climate change arrangement, I was able to have removed what the Greens wanted, to have carbon tax imposed on long-distance heavy transport, and I'm very pleased about that. So there's a number of things. There are rural financial counsellors. They are on a program now. They just live year to year there for a while. So there's a number of things that have occurred. or haven't occurred, have been stopped because of the nature of this particular hung parliament. Excuse me. Freeman House in Armidale is another area. I think that's something like $18 million that's going to be expended here for mental health, and the Commonwealth, through the Regional Development Australia funding, have put in about half of that, I think. One of the proudest things that I've participated in any parliament actually, was having the Backtrack boys come down to Canberra and with their dogs. I assume all of you know the Backtrack boys. With their dogs. The Prime Minister, probably one of the good things about a hung parliament, I was able to ask the Prime Minister, could we have them in the parliamentary precinct? So the dogs and the jumpers and everybody came in, and they did a great job. And at the end of it, I was talking to one of the security guys, and we have some tremendous people who work within the federal parliamentary building, and he made this point to me. He said, if everybody was like that, we wouldn't need security. We wouldn't need security. So I was very proud to have them there, and I was prouder still when the Prime Minister gave them $800,000 to extend their work. The other issue, and people might like to come back to some of the stuff that I've mentioned there. The other issue that I'd like to speak about, and then I'll talk about the Armidale Hospital. But particularly, and one of the main reasons for wanting to have a night like this, and I will be having one in other communities as well, but is to actually we've talked about the hung parliament, the nature of it. People have issues with whether it's Labor, Liberal, whatever, and that's fine. I appreciate that. People may have some issues with the way the determination took place during the 17 days and all of those things. And I'm quite happy to answer those questions if people wanted to chat about that. But the point that I would like to make is that since Federation, and the reason I'm in politics is I love the country. I love farming. I don't want to go to the coast. I want to die where I live. And that's one of the reasons I'm so enthused about the broadband. I can see that keeping people in our communities, whether they be old or young or want to go into business or agriculture or other pursuits. It is an incredibly valuable tool. Some people might like it at the moment, but it is the future. And it gives country people, country businesses a real advantage potentially. But the point I'd make in terms of raw politics is that since Federation, country people, there has been a country member that has always held the balance of power. There hasn't been one parliament that's been formed since Federation where the balance of power hasn't been held by a country member. In the early part of last century, there were a number of parliaments where the balance of power was controlled by smaller groups, and in most cases country groups. And then when we got into, I think, the late 30s and 40s, and Jim might have a better idea than me on the political history of this, the major parties recognised that if they were to hold sway in terms of the progress of the nation in their view, that a more stringent two-party mechanism should apply. And over time that's become quite plain in terms of the dynamics of our parliaments, the House of Representatives particularly, not the Senate, which leads to a number of issues as well. So we've had these parliaments in the main where one side or the other, the executive, holds sway in the House of Reps for probably the last 60 years. I think it was 1949, sometime when we had the last one. So people have got used to one side or the other winning. The point I would like to make on the back of that statement that there hasn't been a parliament since Federation where the balance of power hasn't been held by a country member, what does that mean for the future of regional politics. What it could mean, that even though the country Australia has 30% of the vote, that's not a majority, but it's the biggest minority in town. If you look at what the Greens have achieved with 7% of the vote, I think you start to get the message what 30% can do. What we've done in the last 50, 60 years is we've actually sidelined ourselves, quite deliberately in some cases, quite deliberately, which is sad, into city-based majority parties, irrespective of whether that's the Labor Party, or Country Labor, or Liberal Party and the Nats and Country Liberal, or Liberal National, Liberal, whatever they are, Liberal Country in Northern Territory, Country Liberal. Irrespective of how that's done, the dynamics of democracy dominates from the city. So that even though those people, those members of Parliament, I'm sure they do in some cases, sometimes it's just a bit of a game, but in a lot of cases they wouldn't go into bat for country issues and then come out beaten up on the back of the democracy of the numbers. Now what's the point of talking about all that? What we've seen in this Parliament, and I've been part of it, and I didn't do it deliberately for that reason, but it's a byproduct of it. I've supported a side of Parliament that normally doesn't support country Australia, because not a lot of people vote for it in country Australia. There's a number that do, and they're probably quite good members. But the dynamics of the numbers of the democratic process takes them out of the game. I think if you think about this on both sides of Parliament, particularly when the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, essentially, regrettably, the two management teams vying for work now, their philosophical differences of the worker versus the boss, all of those things have essentially gone. There's a little bit of an argument over the environment. And then most of the rest of the time they construct divisions so that they can have an argument. Have a look at Gonski, the educational reform process. Both sides, particularly country members of Parliament, should be glued to it, absolutely glued to it, because it takes away, for the first time, it takes away those divisions that exist between the private sector, private schools, public schools, and the religious schools. That hasn't happened since the politics of division came into the school sector. So there is the potential. I guess the message I'm trying to get out, and if this Parliament helps that, I hope it does, that country people have got to be smarter in the way that they vote. They've got to be more strategic. And to do that, they've got to do exactly as the Western Australian Nationals did in the last state election. The Western Australian National Party is the closest that I've seen to getting it right, in an organised sense, in a party sense. And what did they do? There was a hung Parliament, or either side got a majority. They bargained with both sides of the Parliament, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. They nearly went with the Labor Party, then the Liberal Party came back with a better offer, and then they sided with the Liberal Party. And in doing that, for the first time, they were able to get a degree of largesse and policy mix that reflected well on their country constituents. And that's exactly what we need to do in country Australia. The fact that we tend to do the same thing, and I know it's different in independent seats, but I'm talking about country politics generally. The fact that we do the same thing time in, time out, allows both sides to just look at us and say, well, we know where you are, and we'll go over to Western Sydney and fight it out over there. That's where the decision will be made. And that's why, and one of the reasons, why we have a bit of a reaction out of Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane from some of the shock jocks, etc., to this current Parliament, because they are so used to having control through the city-based members of Parliament that they can tell them what to do because they've got this enormous audience. They have no control over me, Oakeshott, Wilkie, or other members of the crossbench. So I'd urge you just to think about that particular issue because I think it is significant in terms of our future. New England has been at the forefront of some of these debates in the past. The New State movement was essentially the same thing. City domination, we're sick to death of it, what do we do about it? We'll try and take it into our own hands and do something about it. And Newcastle, the city, majority, driven out by the Premier at that time out of Sydney, they snookered them politically in some crazy move about the dairy industry at the time. So, not easy, but when people say, and I've heard it, I've been in politics for 20 years now, I've heard it constantly, and you're hearing it now with the new coalition state government. Oh, we put them there, well, I thought they'd do something about this coal seam gas stuff. Well, we thought they'd do, they said they would. Why haven't they? Big majorities are never any good for anybody, but they're very, very bad for country people. Small majorities aren't bad because everybody gets into play. But the real point I'm making is that this particular parliament might be an aberration to some of you, but it could be the norm for country Australia into the future if, in fact, the parliamentarians from the country were prepared to bargain with either side of politics to achieve outcomes for their people. And I hope that I've done a bit of that along the way. The other issue, how am I going for time, right?
15 minutes.
The other issue that I'd like to talk about, and I'm quite happy to talk about other issues that people might like to raise, is the Armidale Hospital issue that's been in the media of late. But to do that, I just want to give you a little bit of history. Part of the formation of the minority government was that there would be a regional round of what was called the Health and Hospital Fund. It's a federal fund that was set up. It was set up in 2009 out of the stimulus arrangements. There was something like $5 billion in this fund, or 6.3 when some other money was added to it. There were to be 3 rounds of this Health and Hospital Fund, because it was set under special legislation and funded, so that there could be 3 rounds, a general round for round 1 for all hospitals to apply for, to enhance their facilities. The second one was quite a unique one in the sense, and a very good one, and that was prior to the Hung Parliament, I think, was it? But it was about the cancer clinics, and most of them were across country, Australia. Town Hall got 30-odd million out of that for their cancer clinic, and many other communities. I've got lists of them here. The third round, which is the one that's been in the news in terms of Armidale, was the one that Rob Oakeshott and I were able to go to, and we said to Julia Gillard and to Tony Abbott during that period of time, and they both agreed that country Australia had missed out. And I looked at round 1 of the Health and Hospital Fund. Country hospitals got 13.6% of it. 13.6%. In round 3, and what subsequently became round 4, we were able to ensure that country hospitals got 100%. And the logic we used is it's time we caught up a bit here. This sort of thing's been going on far too long. Prior to the Health and Hospital Fund, there'd be occasional block grants from federal governments through the states, and the states would make their decisions as to where that money would be spent. And time and time again, it would be spent in the cities, not in the country. Partly for political reasons, but partly because there's never enough money in the health budget anyway. So you've got this sort of historical background. The Hung Parliament comes along, we negotiate $1.8 billion to be ring-fenced for country hospitals. We also did a similar thing in terms of the Education Infrastructure Fund that hasn't been announced as yet, but there will be announcements pretty soon on it, which ring-fenced some education infrastructure money for country universities and learning institutions, TAFEs. City people couldn't apply. Some people didn't like it. But in terms of the Health and Hospital Fund, the $1.8 billion was out there, and I might just go to the timeline if I can, or I'll ask one of my guys to help me if I get this a bit around the wrong way. And I think it's important. I do have a solution to this too, but you might think, oh, he's just going to talk about the problem. There is a solution. 7th of September 2010, a minority government is formed. 30th of September, round 3 of the regional priority round for the Health and Hospital Fund, about $1.8 billion is put in place. It's announced. Armidale Hospital at that time, or the Hunter New England Health Service, were looking at the hospital program, what was needed, what was required for the future. Tamworth Base Hospital had actually done a bit more homework previously, a few years previously, so that they had a full-blown concept plan, costed, etc., in place. When round 3 came along, Tamworth and some other hospitals were able to apply and meet the criteria. And the criteria were pretty strict. And wasn't politically vetted, it was vetted by an independent board, the Health and Hospital Board. And you can't get the documents of the Health and Hospital Board. They're their documents, not political documents. So we had this circumstance where round 3 was announced. When did round 3 close, John?
10th of May, 11.
Round 3 closes 10th of May. Some hospitals, that's 2011, some hospitals, Armidale being one of them, hadn't had sufficient time to get their documentation so it would absolutely fit with the criteria. It wasn't far away, there are only a couple of minor things in it, but, and a number of others across Australia had the same issue. Tamworth was okay and some of the others were okay because they'd been working on it for years. What was decided then, that rather than the whole $1.8 billion go out in one hit, and we were criticised for this, I can remember Barnaby Joyce and a few of the others giving me a flogging over it, we got it reduced to 1.3. And of course the argument was, oh look, yeah, they're not going to spend the money now, they're starting to cut back already. Where's the 1.8 going? They're only going to spend 1.3. The reason for doing that was quite deliberate. A number of health services weren't able to get their documentation together in the time. And it gave them the opportunity, and Armidale was part of this, the opportunity to enhance their applications, or people that hadn't even applied in the first round, or in round 3, to come back in round 4. Now, I went to a number of the meetings with the health people here. Hunter New England Health were involved, a lot of people were involved, and it was decided to develop up the plan so it would in fact meet the criteria. There was a state election in the middle of that somewhere, just prior to that. What we had was a circumstance then where there was $475 million of federal funding that was up for grabs in what we now call round 4. Armidale Hospital was taken off the list. There was no application made for, no application to attempt. There was no guarantee that it would have got money. But it was the only hospital where it was deliberately taken off a list and given the opportunity to at least have a go at getting the money. Would have met the criteria. Michael Di Lorenzo had done a good job in that. No doubt about it. Our IFFOI, the New South Wales Department of Health on this, we know it would have met the criteria, it was taken off and not applied for. So it lost the opportunity to be part of the federal funding round out of the health and the hospital fund. Armidale's money went to Kempsey, I think. Kempsey got 40 million and Lismore got 70 million out of that, and good luck to them. But you can't say in life that you're certain, but you're never going to get certainty if you're not even in the game. And Gillian Skinner she's the New South Wales Minister for Health. She has admitted in recent weeks that in fact is what has occurred. I've got all the documentation that says that she misled the Parliament. She's admitted that they had other priorities. Now, part of that was aimed at me because they thought I could play games with the money and Armidale would have a victory. Part of it was aimed at Richard Torbo as well. And bearing in mind this is before he had the conversion.
Which one?
But it was when he was, Richard II as we call him. It was when, if New South Wales, on the change of government to a coalition, had have allowed that application to go forward, the thinking would have been that Windsor would have tampered with it at the federal level, and both Windsor and Torbo would have kicked a goal. And you can't have that. So this nonsense that's out there at the moment, that this is some sort of game that I'm playing, I work, and Rob Oakeshott as well, we work very hard to get a process, a proper process, where there was a fund where all country hospitals could apply to. Armidale was the only one that was taken on. It was deliberately taken on. And that's why I'm annoyed over that. Now, none of the other states did that. Everybody had the right. They could have if they'd wanted to. Because the New South Wales Minister for Health has the right to prioritise. And that's an appropriate right. They could have put Armidale at number 36, which probably would have meant that it wouldn't have got the funding. But they didn't even do that. So it's a political atrocity in my view, and I'm going to pursue it. There are a number of things that happen concurrently with that, and this has got to do with politics as well. There was an independent in the seat of Tamworth who'd been responsible for doing a lot of the legwork in terms of getting Tamworth Base Hospital to a position where if any money came along, they were ready to apply. And there's people who were involved in the financial work in this building where they were ready to apply. So when round 3 jumped out of the woodwork, they said, this is for us, because we can meet those criteria. It's invaluable to the medical school in Armidale, the relationship with Newcastle University, the relationship with Armidale, and Armidale Hospital is invaluable to that too. It's not just about bricks and mortar servicing patients. It's about the totality, it's about teaching, it's about what Victor and his people, Peter McEwen and those people are actually doing. That's why it's important. It's more important than the normal hospital. It's important because of the way in which it will play a role in the teaching processes of young doctors and allied services. And that is the other part that really annoys me in terms of this particular process. But the other thing that happened during that election was that round 3 had opened. At that stage it was 1.8. Tamworth applied. I made an announcement that, and the previous Labor government had said to Peter Draper that they'd put 29 million in. It's a bit like the 10 million that Richard has. It runs around, it's here one day and gone the next. But the previous Labor government had $29 million that it was prepared to put in as a co-funder into a $220 million deal. The Health and Hospital Fund would have accepted that as an application. 29, which was called 30, 29, which meant in a 220 million hospital they needed another 190. They would have been able to get 190 million out of the Health and Hospital Fund. The state government at the time, to take Peter Draper out of the game, decided, no, we won't put 30 in, or 29, we'll put 100 in. We'll put 100 in and then we'll claim that space and that'll take that independent out. We can't have the federal independent looking as though he's getting all the money. Well, that's what they want me to do now, up here. So there was $70 million that could have been spent up here. Could have been spent. It wasn't required to be lifted to 100 to be eligible for the Health and Hospital Fund. Tamworth-based hospital would have almost assuredly gone ahead anyway because of the importance of the medical school and all those allied facilities. And that the remaining money could have financed this particular hospital. Now, okay, that's the historical context. What do we do about it? Do we play this funny game that's going on at the moment, where Gillian Skinner won't actually say anything now? And I was in the Parliament with Gillian, and I've got some regard for her. But she's caught in a political web at the moment. 6 weeks ago, she made the statement on prime television that Armidale Hospital wasn't a priority, so that's why they didn't apply. Now it is a priority, a political priority. And Andrew Stone is doing advocating work on that. So where the demand in New South Wales Parliament yesterday is that the state's put up $10 million, the federal members should go away and get whatever it is, the 40, 50 or 60, we're not quite sure. Because there's been no application put anywhere. There's no application out there that I'm supposed to run off and get this money to fund something that hasn't even been applied for. I wrote to Gillian Skinner 10 days ago, can you give me a full-blown costing of what you propose or would like to do in terms of Armidale Hospital? She wrote back, and someone had the letter over there, but didn't mention anything about costing. Very curt letter. No documentation has been received. I was in touch with the Federal Minister's office today, and they've done a check of any applications that have been made for funding under the the Health and Hospital Fund is defunct now. It's open. Just say, we'll put in 10 and you go and get the rest from the Health and Hospital Fund. It is empty. We emptied it. There is no money left in that program. And that's the other farcical situation that's been perpetrated on these people, the people in Armidale. The Commonwealth is saying capital funding under the National Partnerships Agreement improving public hospital services, and they've come back to this particular person and they've confirmed, they confirmed that the state government, New South Wales government and the other governments, submit projects for funding through implementation plans which can be updated at any given time, to reflect their priorities. It is not the Commonwealth's role to nominate priorities or sites, and it's not legal. The states are very protective of their rights to control their money and where they spend their capital. The Commonwealth comes in with a lot of recurrent funding to operate and help operate, but it is the state's prerogative to operate the hospitals. And even as late as last week in the meetings that they were having in terms of the internship issues that are on at the moment, the states, through the COAG process, said once again, we want the right to determine where capital expenditure occurs. So we've got this extraordinary circumstance now where, in a sense, I'm being asked as the federal member, because of the Health and Hospital Fund, which is no longer, because of the games that were played to remove the possibility of funding out of that Health and Hospital Fund, to actually get the Commonwealth to prioritise a hospital in a state that hasn't been submitted, there hasn't been a submission for it. You don't have to believe that to me. Armidale Hospital is not the recipient of any funding, capital or recurrent, under the National Partnership or what is it, Improving Public Hospital Services. New South Wales have not indicated any future funding for Armidale Hospital. In Armidale Hospital received just over $300,000 for the purchases of equipment under the elective surgery waiting list reduction plan. That's where New South Wales is in relation to this hospital. Nothing has been received. They can, at the drop of a hat, as they say here, and it's been verified, but John has gone through the health and the various national partnership documentation over there, the agreements, the co-aid processes, etc. But they say in here, plans which can be confirm that the state government submit projects for funding through implementation plans which can be updated at any given time to reflect their priorities. So, at the drop of a hat, New South Wales could rearrange its priorities. Now, New South Wales is asking for federal government assistance to build Armidale Hospital. When you examine the implementation plans that the New South Wales government has at the moment, which they can change at any time, if in fact they want to reprioritise something. And Andrew Stone yesterday and Richard and others have said that it is now a priority of New South Wales. Gillian Skinner still struggles to say that. If she says, or the Premier or Andrew Stone says, Armidale is a priority in New South Wales for federal funding, there won't be an issue. There won't be an issue. They're not interested in actually building the thing. The interest is to keep it burning, just to keep the politics burning. There is to build the Armidale Hospital, the planning, the various processes would take at least 2 or 3 years. You know, you can see what's happened with Tamworth. I think they're starting to dig some dirt this week. It was 2 years nearly since they were ready to go. It takes time. In that 2 to 2.5 year period that it would take, there is about $500 million of Commonwealth money that is available to the states for them to prioritise. And we have this nonsense that's out there at the moment. If they change their implementation plan so that Armidale Hospital is a priority, as some people are saying it is, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is not about healthcare. If it was about healthcare, they would have seen the value of Armidale, Tamworth and Taree to the education of professionals as well as the provision of healthcare to people who live in these towns. They would have seen that as a natural priority, and they haven't done that. So what I'm suggesting, I'm more than happy. I had to talk to Gillian Skinner, but I think she's embarrassed now. I think she was guilty to start with. I think it's embarrassment now. More than happy to talk to Gillian, organise a meeting with the Federal Minister. If in fact, there's 2 decisions they have to make here. If in fact they say that Armidale is their #1 priority, there's federal money there to fund it. All they have to do is change their implementation plan. If in fact they're not saying that, they're saying, as the politics are saying at the moment, we'd rather Windsor and his crew, as Labor people, go off and fund this. If Gillian Skinner wants to release New South Wales from obtaining $50 million of Commonwealth funding and release that back to the Commonwealth to make that decision and prioritise a hospital, I'm quite happy to help there too. But they can't have it both ways. They can't say, we want to determine our priorities and we want to determine where we spend the federal money, not have the Commonwealth choosing the sites and the priorities. That's where I might leave that debate at the moment. That is the crossroads they're at. We'll keep doing what we can, working through these various intergovernmental agreements to make something happen. But you can rest assured something will happen. You can never guarantee anything in life, but I can nearly guarantee that something will happen here Not for the reasons that some people would like to see it happen, the reasons that it should happen. It should happen. We've got an incredible university out here. We've got some incredible things happening, and I know of some things that are going to happen that you don't know about. This is a real opportunity for this community. We've got this incredible opportunity of the connectivity issues in terms of broadband, the way it can embrace the health system, the way in which the clinical school, all of these things can work together, the way in which Tamworth and Taree and others can actually plug themselves in, and the way in which that will create opportunities, not just for here, but for other country people. That's the sort of stuff that we should be focusing on, and there's a lot of people in this community that have actually done that, and we'll be doing what we can to make sure that happens. Have I missed out on anything? John's the expert on this. The rest of us think we are. John he likes the fine print. And I thank him for that, because there's been a lot of very good work done by all of the staff by actually taking the time to do the homework rather than play the game. I might end there. There were other issues I was going to raise. We might go to questions, and if someone wants to drag me back to a particular issue, I'll attempt to answer it. So, thank you very much.